With Chainsman Chapter 199, the story takes another shift towards the crazy by having the Death Devil do something that should give everyone who's still traumatized by what Makima did in Part 1 some severe PTSD, because just as Makima took over control of the hybrids for her own personal army, the same is true for the Death Devil, but this time there is a twist that's been added to it, and one that makes a lot of sense in hindsight as more foreshadowing has been paid off. And as you would expect from what appears to be the final boss of the series, the Death Devil, this is one of those times where she took Makima's power and it's completely on steroids. However, let's back things up and let's unpack what we have in the chapter itself. So we open up the chapter with the Death Devil being told to lower her skirt because her panties are showing, and the Death Devil just gets right down to business and wastes no time laying out the situation, and that the true situation Famine is in, which is that it's not as simple as wanting the Death Devil to just simply die, and that's a big problem for someone like Famine. What the Death Devil reveals is that even if she could die, humanity would just run into a situation of there would be possibly there being an even worse version of the Death Devil who's reborn, and that for as bad as things are, Famine should at least keep in mind that this version of the Death Devil herself does truly enjoy human nature, so take some solace in something like that. That's when the Death Devil is told by Fake Chainsman, if you love this culture so much, then why don't you just give up on trying to destroy it? And it's a question that is so simple that it's really brilliant, and it's one that you have likely asked yourself, and I know it's one that I've asked myself as well. After all this time, how much of this was the Death Devil just secretly plotting, waiting to make her move, and how much was it her true personality that we saw? Was she just lying to Naruto when she talked about all those bad things that would happen, and losing things like, say, Chinese takeout if the Death Devil were to emerge, which now we know is her? If she was really that worried about mankind, then the only logical option would be to do exactly what Fake Chainsman was suggesting, but that's not what happens here. The Death Devil reveals that she can't do anything like that because everything's set in stone right now. She manifests when the day of the prophecy occurs and the fear of death in mankind reaches its peak, and when that happens, it's going to be unavoidable because all of her powers are going to awaken whether or not she is conscious, and that makes this even scarier because she's not at full power right now. This leads to the real Famine offering up a solution, one that might seem like it makes a lot of sense, which is the real Famine says, well, if you feel that way, then why don't you just let Chainsman eat you? If you do that, then the concept of death, it will go away due to how Chainsman's powers work, and that too seems like it's a really great idea, and it does make you go back to the Eternity Devil Returns arc where the conversation with Yoshida and Denji occurred, and Yoshida joked about Chainsman eating the Death Devil to get rid of the fear of death. It's something that looks more and more likely it's going to be a possibility given how foreshadowing has been getting paid off all throughout Chainsman Part 2. This is further backed up because the Death Devil doesn't really say anything. Instead, she's just standing there in silence before she tells Famine and Chainsman that they're going to help her, and the way that she plans to have them do so is just downright brutal because she's going to consume them, literally consume them, and the Falling Devil, never one to miss out on a chance to cook up a meal, gets right to work, and we get this creepy sequence where we see all these crows flying away from the plate, and after the Death Devil finishes eating, she sticks her hand in her mouth, and for a moment you think, is this where she's going to make herself puke? And that's partly right, but there's something else to this. She doesn't puke up the body so much as she pukes up two small figures of Fake Chainsman and Famine, and we learn how her power works, and very interesting enough, we find out that Fake Chainsman's name is really called Fake Chainsaw Man. After she eats someone, she's able to make those figures, which appear to be wax in nature, and she states the name of those who she consumed, and she summons them back into their bodies, and they appear to have full recollection and free will, and they remember everything that happened when they were eaten, which is kind of scary given that they were eaten alive. And Famine, upon being summoned, immediately punches the Death Devil, and the Fake Chainsaw Man is asking how were they seemingly alive right now because he remembers they were eaten alive. But Famine suddenly holds up a hand saying wait, and that's when we find out that the Falling Devil was about to cut the head off of Famine, and that's where we see the other side of the Death Devil's power. With just a simple phrase, she orders fake Chainsman and Famine to terrorize mankind, and we see that she's got some kind of control power over her victims, making it very similar to Makima, but in a different way, in the sense that the Death Devil seemingly has to eat her victims alive in order to use this power. And unlike with Makima, her victims, at least at the very beginning, have their free will. Like the last chapter, we're ending this one off with more questions than we have answers, and in all honesty, it's a good thing because it keeps us reading as readers, and most importantly, that symbolism with the crows is absolutely huge. Now, the other thing that this chapter did, before we get into the whole aspect with the crows, is that this chapter makes you go back and look at everything that's happened so far in part 2, and you just ask yourself, how far ahead was the Death Devil thinking, and did she even consider the possibility of what happens if Chainsman eats her in this moment? She went from being completely under the radar here, nobody caught on to the fact that she was lying to everyone, and now she is freaking enslaving a horsewoman and Famine, and also fake Chainsman, who's also working with the Justice Devil. This, for all intents and purposes, is a second coming of Makima in terms of the chaos she's about to unleash, and what's even scarier is that she's allowing her victims to have free will until she finally decides to take it away. The other thing that's interesting is that Famine appears to have basically been eating by using crows, and that's where this hits harder when you look at this from this perspective. So crows in Japan, they have multiple meanings depending on what you grow with, especially when you look at, say, Shintoism. So crows are seen as messengers of the divine. They are tied to the spiritual world. They're shown to be a guidance and tied to divine will, but they also have links to the underworld when you look at the dark feathers and crows. In a lot of stories, they have also been shown to be linked to upcoming war, a sign and an omen of war in particular. This is going to be interesting when you take that into account, which is, does the next chapter shift over to Yoru, the war devil, to further this whole point? The other thing we also have to look at is the fact that one of the people who the Death Devil ate using the crows was the Famine Devil, and it's a duality that is extremely poetic, because a bird that is viewed as sacred in a lot of stories in Shintoism is basically being used as a Grim Reaper. Look at it from this perspective too. Based on everything that we know in Chainsaw Man, the Four Horsemen, the Death Devil, the War Devil, the Famine Devil, the Control Devil, they don't exactly play nice as a family. We've seen that multiple times. The Death Devil sicking the crows on Famine could lean into that battlefield imagery with War, Yoru as a sister who would naturally fit into the chaos that the crows trail leave behind. Fujimoto, when you really look at him, loves to twist things. So the crows, they might be a nod to Yadagasuru, and Death could be asserting dominance as the eldest, guiding her siblings to their end. Eating Famine in particular, maybe that's a power move. Famine being a slow death that crows, and Death can accelerate into something immediate and brutal. Japanese folklore doesn't explicitly tie crows to eating siblings, but their presence in a war-torn scene, like say the tale of Hieke, where they hover over fallen warriors, could inspire Fujimoto's spin here. The Death Devil's involvement adds another layer. Crows follow her domain naturally, and Death might be using them to mock that connection, using the symbol of war's aftermath into her personal weapon. It's very dark and it's very messy, and it fits into Chainsaw Man's vibe of flipping sacred tropes onto something even more savage. It does make you wonder, is this being set up to make Denji even more powerful? Because with fake Chainsaw Man running around, driving people into despair, it should make people fear Chainsaw Man all that much more. And that could give him a power up. It should give him a power up. However, with Famine there, that's also important, because this could lead to the Famine Devil impacting food supplies, which that would spark a shortage. That would spark violence, because that would also spark war. And if there's war, that powers up Yoru and Mitaka, people who were supposed to be getting powered up in order to fight the Death Devil. And we do know that the current Death Devil does have a soft spot for humanity, and she did try to kill herself. This could be her thinking 400 steps ahead. And this also makes you go back and look at the Death Devil's connection to Nayuta's death all over again. The Death Devil said she needs Nayuta to work with her to stop this prophecy. Nayuta's head was on a platter, just like Famine, and the fake Chainsaw Man were. This gets even spookier when you realize that right when Pochita was emerging after Denji fell into despair, Famine, or rather the Death Devil, she got the hell out of there. And so too, when she left, did Nayuta's head. That opens up the door that Death Devil was using Nayuta as a pawn, and her death was intentional, and she's using Nayuta, which makes sense why Denji brought up the Control Devil a few chapters back. Famine was eaten alive, but she's now alive and she's under control. She's not dead. We have to ask ourselves, is this a case where the Control Devil too is under that same influence, and is she's basically in a position where the Death Devil can break that cycle of life and death, that cycle of reincarnation that we know devils have? Because based on what we see, it does look like that's the case, and it makes sense that the Death Devil has that type of control. Obviously, if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and clicking here to check out more videos from Anime Explained.